Welcome to Sleep with Myth. Close your eyes and let the world fade away. Tonight we drift beyond time, where gods dream and stories remember their light. Before names were carved into stone and prayers learned their first syllables, there was only breath. The long, tidal breath of a world remembering it had a heart. From that breath, land rose and softened. From that softness, mountains leaned into clouds. From those clouds, rain found its courage and called the sleeping seeds by their true names. The first forests opened their eyes, green and patient, and the seas laid their silver hands upon every shore to promise a rhythm the sky could trust. Beneath all roots and above all summits, two presences kept the world. Gaia, broad-backed and endless, whose skin became valley and meadow and fire's cradle, and Uranus, high and lucid, whose body was the night hung with 1,000 slow fires. When he bent, stars spilled. When she turned, rivers learned to curve. Between them, the first hush became a home. They loved the way dawn loves the horizon, meeting and parting, touching and letting go. And from that meeting came children, titans vast and deliberate as seasons, and deeper still children with stranger shapes, the Cyclopes with their single perfect eyes, and the 100-handed ones, whose strength was a mountain's hidden grammar. Each child carried a piece of the world's first promise, that what is heavy may still be gentle, and what is bright may still be wise. But there is a kind of fear that sometimes grows in the high places, thin, cold, precise. Uranus felt that fear when he looked upon the children who shone too wildly, whose power made even the stars seem young. He named that fear order. In the language of new skies, he called it safety. In the language of old earth, Gaia called it hunger, the kind that wants every horizon to stand still. So the sky learned cruelty. Uranus looked down and chose a prison. Tartarus, the pit older than speech, where even echoes go to kneel. Into that depth he pressed the Cyclopes with their single lightning eyes. Into that depth he fastened the 100-handed, binding each arm with night and a lock of star iron that remembered only closing. The pit received them without joy, swallowed song. It kept their strength like winter keeps the seed, not to save it, but to silence it. Gaia felt the chains as if they were laid across her own ribs. Mountains stooped. Springs dried of their laughter. Forests held their breath so long the birds forgot which note began the morning. Pain is an alphabet. She learned to read each letter in soil and salt. She lifted her voice, but the night was stitched shut with Uranus's pride. The stars looked on, obedient and bright. In the hollows where roots drink dark, Gaia made a slow litany. All that grows must open. All that opens must breathe. All that breathes must one day answer to gentleness. She spoke this not to the sky, but to the children still free, the titans who moved like epochs across her back. Their names were Stone and River, Harvest and Storm, Memory and Door. And among them was one whose gaze cut clean as a new blade through overgrown fields. Kronos. Kronos was a patient horizon. He watched long before he acted. He listened long before he chose. He learned from the turning of seasons how time is both rope and river. From his mother, he learned the weight of tenderness. From his father, the weight of fear. Between those weights, he felt his own spine find purpose. Gaia called her children to the secret places where heat sleeps in the earth and old metals remember fire. "Who will unfasten the night?" she asked. "Who will open the door that pride has locked?" Her voice was not a trumpet. It was rain on drought, the soft insistence that makes stone learn to be sand. The titans shifted like continents. Some bowed their heads and would not meet her eyes. Some looked to the rim of the world where Uranus's blue knee rested on the line of everything. They felt their father's vastness and found it easier to name that vastness good than to ask what price was being paid for such clean, constant light. "I will," said Kronos at last, and the word fell with the sound of a scythe set gently upon a table. Gaia did not grin, for earth smiles only in flowers. She sank her hand into the deep and drew forth ore that had slept since mountains were dreams. She warmed it with the breath of caves. She bathed it in the patience of springs. She taught it the curve that wheat makes when it is ready to give itself to winter. From these, she forged a sickle bright, moon-pale, keen with the mercy of endings that make room for beginnings. She placed it in Kronos's hands. It did not feel like a weapon. It felt like a season. "Do not sharpen this with hatred," Gaia said. "Sharpen it with remembering." Kronos learned the weight of the blade the way a shepherd learns the hillside. Not to harm, but to guide. Yet in his chest, something old and iron-warm stirred. The knowledge that to open a locked sky, one must cut a hinge. He hid the sickle in shadow, where no star would tell on him, and waited for the hour he needed. The hour when night leans heaviest upon the world and even pride grows drowsy. In Tartarus, the chained ones heard a tremor that was not their own struggling. It traveled down locks and through links. It made iron taste like dawn. The 100-handed curled each fist around a whisper and passed it between them like contraband. Change rides the root. The Cyclopes tilted their single eyes toward the rock and saw, for the first time in a long time, a hairline seen between stone and sentence. When at last Uranus came to lay himself across the world, sky upon earth, father upon mother, he did as he always did. He covered, he kept, he commanded the stars to be unblinking. But the stars are distant fires. They cannot refuse a nearby flame. From the hill of the world's first olive, Kronos rose. Silence gathered about him like a cloak that had been waiting only for his height to fit it. Kronos stepped into the seam between sky and earth. Gaia arched, making room without moving. The night air smelled of iron and unspoken relief. Above him, he felt the vast chest of Uranus lifting and falling, the breath of constellations who had never learned how to be surprised. The sickle flashed. No thunder accompanied it. No chorus declared a victory. It was a clean, bright arc, quick as a promise kept, simple as a line drawn between two truths. Uranus cried out in a language stars cannot bear to hear. The sound bent constellations into unfamiliar shapes that would one day become stories mortals tell to calm their children. Blood fell, not red, not warm, but luminous, like seeds of evening scattered across water. Where it touched sea, white foam gathered. Where it touched earth, thistles learned to sing. What Kronos cut was not only flesh. He cut the chain of a habit older than fairness. He cut the certainty that power needs no witness. As the severed part fell, the future widened by one breath, then another. The sky drew back from the earth. Not far, just enough to teach both longing and respect. Space opened, the room in which seasons could walk without tripping over pride. Uranus, wounded and astonished, lifted himself higher than he had ever been. He fled the nearness of soil, carrying his hurt into a distance where even thunder goes quiet. From that distance he cursed. A long, thin curse that would outlive its first anger. As I bound my children, so shall your children bind you. The words stretched like cold wire across time and found places to fasten that Kronos could not yet see. For now there was unfastening. Locks that had believed in their own eternity remembered their weakness. Tartarus yawned like a jaw unclenching. The 100-handed uncoiled, each arm learning its strength anew, not as boasting, but as instrument. The Cyclopes blinked their single eyes, and their tears came hot and brief, burning small caves in the floor where hope could sleep if it needed to. They stepped into a world with edges they had only dreamed of touching. The 100-handed lifted mountains the way a child lifts a blanket to climb beneath it. The Cyclopes raised their palms and caught starlight, teaching it to gather into bolts that could speak. In their first gratitude, the air itself grew taller. Kronos stood with the sickle lowered. He looked not triumphant but changed, the way a field looks changed after harvest. Emptier, yes, but also truer to the next thing it must become. Gaia came to him, not in thunderous thanks, but in the soft seizure of wind through grass. "It is done," he said. "It is begun," she corrected. For Earth is never finished, only continuing. The Titans gathered. Oceanus lifted his long blue brow and hummed a low approval that the whales would remember. Rhea stood beside Kronos and placed her hand over the hand that held the blade. Her touch was the first warm thing he had felt since the cut. Hyperion turned his face toward the east where the new space between sky and land promised a cleaner dawn. Themis closed her eyes and weighed what had happened, and in her silence was the beginning of a word mortals would later call justice. Kronos raised the sickle and set it upon a rock. He would keep it near and far. He would sleep with it beside him and dream with it in another room. He would swear to use it only to open, never to hoard. And in the invisible air above the blade, Uranus's curse hummed like a thin wire, stringing the present to a future heavy with echoes. Night exhaled. For the first time, stars felt the space between themselves and learned to be constellations rather than a crowd. Winds found corridors to move through that did not scrape their elbows against the world. Rivers widened their mouths and tasted the idea of sea. On hilltops, grasses practiced the small bow that would become a whole nation of grains. Deep underfoot, Tartarus settled back into its old deepness, less burdened now, but no kinder. It would remember, pits always do, but the chains had fallen, and in their falling they made a music no lyre could replicate. A rain of iron that taught the night how to count to mercy. Kronos listened to that music until it dimmed. Then he turned to his siblings and spoke, his voice steady as a winter road. "We will make an age," he said, "not of shackles, but of order that does not fear." The sky trembled and learned distance. The earth trembled and learned breath. Between them we will be the hinge. We will be the long, calm swing of years. The Titans answered with the slow ascent of mountains. Rhea's ascent was a warmth. Themis's ascent was a silence. Oceanus's ascent was a tide that did not strike the shore too hard. Even Atlas, who would one day carry a burden he could not yet imagine, bowed his neck as if testing the grace of weight before it arrives. Only in the far blue, where wounded pride learns to write, did a new story begin that would circle back like a hawk, a father's curse looking for a time to land. Kronos did not hear it fully. He heard only the wind's soft grammar teaching his name to the trees. He felt only the relief of a mother whose ribs were not a cage tonight. He watched the Cyclopes lift first bolts that would one day become gifts and reckonings. He watched the 100-handed drum their fingers against clouds until rain learned a steadier cadence. And the night, oh, the night grew kind again. It learned not to press. It learned to rest its palm lightly upon fields where seeds were busy in their private mathematics. The moon rose, thin and clean, and met her new distance with curiosity rather than fear. Somewhere a fox slipped out from a hole and found the air less heavy on its fur. Somewhere a child not yet born learned in the womb that darkness can be safe if distance is honest. Gaia lay back and drew a breath she had been saving since chains were invented. Uranus, far away, bled into silence and wrote his vow upon horizons where prophecy keeps its tools. And Kronos, who had opened a door, stepped through without knowing that doors, like sickles, cut both ways. The first rebellion did not end the night. Taught it. It did not crown a victor, tuned a season. And as the world turned, slow, attentive, newly spacious, the hinge began to whisper of another trembling to come, of children within children, of a cradle that would one day rock too hard, of a father who would swallow what he feared to lose, and of a sky that would learn to tremble once more, not from cruelty this time, but from birth. For now the world slept lighter. For now the sickle cooled. For now, rivers kept the secret of the cut in their glittering curves, and stars kept the memory of the cry in a new arrangement that made shepherds point and tell, in late fields, stories that softened the edge of winter. The age had begun, and in the beginning of any age, there is a quiet loud enough to write the next chapter. Listen, the sky has learned to breathe. The earth has room for the step that will follow. The night holds the blade's reflection as if it were a moon. Tomorrow will bring the weight of choices. Tomorrow will test the promise. But tonight belongs to the breath after rebellion, the breath that counts the living, blesses the freed, and teaches even power to sleep. The air after rebellion was sweeter than any wine the world would ever know. The wound between heaven and earth had healed into distance, and that distance became music. Rivers no longer whispered of chains. Winds wandered where they pleased. Even silence had learned to breathe again. Kronos, son of Gaia and Uranus, stood at the center of that newborn calm. The sickle, washed and hidden, rested in the hollow of a cave where light and dark agreed to forget each other for a while. Above him stretched the sky, his father's remnant, still trembling from the cut, still trembling from the thought of being separate. The Titans gathered around him. Oceanus flowed in from the west, his blue robes dragging foam and twilight. Hyperion brought dawns in his hair and carried the heat of days that did not yet exist. Rhea stood beside Kronos, patient and radiant, her gaze the gentlest of mirrors. Themis, quiet and certain, held in her palms the first scales ever made, though no one yet knew their name. Together, they formed a council not of conquest but of stillness. "This will be an age without fear," said Kronos, his voice steady as a hill newly risen. "No child shall be bound, no mother shall cry into stone." And for a time it was so. The Golden Age began not as a festival but as a long exhale. The world ripened without hunger. Trees gave fruit without asking for rain. Rivers remembered every path they had ever taken and chose the kindest one. Men, not yet mortal but already curious, lived as gentle as shadows under wide skies that asked for nothing in return. The Titans moved among them like seasons, not gods but guides. Oceanus taught the rivers to listen. Hyperion lifted the sun each morning with hands too steady for anger. Ceus mapped the first constellations, teaching light how to tell stories. Crius shaped the winds into directions so travelers would know how to come home. Mnemosyne, memory herself, gathered every kindness spoken and tucked it beneath the roots of mountains so that even stone would remember how to be soft. And Kronos kept time. He watched over the world as one watches a sleeping child, counting its breaths. He marked each dawn, each dusk, each grain's bow to harvest. His rule was neither throne nor chain. It was rhythm. Under his gaze, days folded perfectly into nights. Ages unrolled like silk. Even the sea learned to sleep between tides. But perfection, like still water, invites reflection, and reflection invites doubt. One night, as the stars wheeled slow and kind above the earth, Kronos walked the hills alone. The moon rested low, and the sickle's memory lay cold against his thoughts. He looked upon the calm he had made, and he felt something move beneath it, something he could not name. It was not fear at first. It was tenderness turned sharp. The wind spoke, though it meant no harm. "You have made peace so complete," it whispered, "that even change fears to enter." Kronos frowned. "Change brings wounds, and wounds bring growth," the wind replied. "Even the trees you love break their own shells to rise." He turned away, but the whisper followed him like breath. "The sky trembled once," it said. "It may tremble again. Not from cruelty, this time from birth." He did not answer, but the words found a place to rest in him, like seeds do in the quiet before spring. Days passed. The Titans continued their work. Rhea walked beside him, her hands always full of beginnings. The first wheat, the first lamb, the first spark drawn gently from stone. Her smile carried a calm so deep that even shadows grew humble in her presence. "You do not sleep," she told him once, finding him watching the horizon long after the sun had drowned itself in gold. Even gods must rest. He smiled without warmth. If I rest, time might forget to move. Time, she said softly, moves through you, not because of you. Her words were kind, but they opened a wound he did not know he carried. If time could move without him, what need would there be for Kronos? What is a keeper when the kept no longer needs watching? The seed of fear, faint and familiar, sprouted. In dreams, he began to see his father's face again. Not the vast dome of sky, but the voice that cursed him, thin as wire and sharp as prophecy. As I bound my children, so shall your children bind you. Each morning he awoke before dawn, tasting that curse in the light. He looked upon the Titans with new eyes, seeing not siblings, but heirs. Each was strong, and strength he had learned does not always obey. He told no one, yet Gaia knew. Mothers always do. The earth beneath his feet throbbed faintly when he passed, as though it pitied what was coming. The rivers quieted their songs when he lingered by their banks. Even Oceanus, wide as forever, felt a shadow lengthening in the current. Then, one evening, Rhea came to him with light in her eyes and mystery in her voice. "There is life within me," she said. "A child." Kronos smiled, but the smile did not reach the roots of him. The prophecy stirred like thunder far away. He tried to drown it in joy, in duty, in the rhythm of stars, but it grew louder. Each time he looked at her swelling form, he saw not future, but repetition. The circle was closing, the curse was waking, and so the first cracks appeared in the golden age. Storms grew bolder, lingering longer than before. The sun faltered once, not in weariness but in thought. Even the rivers seemed to hesitate, as though unsure which song to sing. Themis weighed these things in her invisible scales and said quietly to herself, "Balance shifts." The day came when Rhea's cry echoed through the halls of the Titans. Her first son was born, Hestian fire in her eyes, warmth in her arms. She held him up, laughing through tears. "He is ours," she whispered. "He is the new beginning." Kronos approached. His shadow fell long across the floor. The prophecy pulsed like a drum in his blood. "As I bound my children." He looked at the infant, so small, so pure, and for a moment the curse broke against tenderness. He reached out a trembling hand. The child's tiny fingers wrapped around one of his. The grip was warm, trusting. Then the sky rumbled. It was not thunder. It was memory. Far above, Uranus shifted in his distance, turning one wounded eye toward the world that had once defied him. The sound was like the scraping of fate sharpening its blade. Kronos froze. The words came again, clearer now, spoken not from above but from within. "As I bound my children, so shall your children bind you." And fear, ancient and perfect, bloomed fully within him. He took the child in his hands. Rhea gasped, not yet believing what she saw. Kronos, no, but he was already moving, quick, silent, desperate. His mouth opened. Time itself seemed to pause, horrified, as he swallowed the child whole. Silence fell. It was heavy and complete. the silence of the first grave ever dug in a world that had not yet known death. When he looked at Rhea again, tears burned her cheeks. Her scream did not echo. Even mountains held their breath. Kronos turned away, unable to meet her eyes. The golden age ended in that moment. Not with war, not with fire, but with the quiet breaking of trust. Days returned to their rhythm, but their peace was hollow. The sun still rose, but slower. The stars still turned, but uneasily. Rhea walked beside him no more. When she looked at him, she saw the shadow of the father he had slain. And deep in Kronos' stomach, time curled upon itself, cradling what it had devoured. He ruled still, yes, but now his crown was silence, and his throne was fear. The sky, remembering its own trembling, began again to shake. Somewhere, beneath the earth's patient skin, Gaia whispered to herself, "All that grows must open. All that opens must breathe. All that breathes must answer to gentleness." And from that whisper the next age began to stir. The world held its breath after Kronos swallowed his first child. The rivers, once loud with laughter, now moved quietly, as though afraid of echoing the act. The sun shone, but its warmth had thinned. Even the mountains bent their peaks in mourning, unwilling to pierce the grieving sky. Rhea walked the halls of the Titans like a ghost of gentleness. Her arms were empty, her songs unmade. Yet she spoke to no one of her sorrow, not even to Gaia, whose roots trembled with sympathy. For within her silence grew something fierce, something older than fear: resolve. Kronos sat upon his throne of stone and stillness, his gaze unblinking. He was time itself now, measured, merciless, patient. He ruled without joy, for joy is movement, and movement reminded him of change. He counted moments instead, stacking them like stones to build a wall against prophecy. And yet, prophecy seeps through any wall that breath can find. When Rhea conceived again, Kronos watched her with a quiet dread he could not disguise. His love had become suspicion, his tenderness a trembling mirror of his father's cruelty. Each smile she gave him, he weighed for deceit. Each silence he feared was a spell. "Why do you look at me so?" she asked one evening, her voice fragile as the edge of glass. "Because time repeats," he said simply, "and I will not be unmade." She turned from him, and though her face was calm, her heart thundered with the footsteps of rebellion yet unborn. Months passed, and another child came, a boy strong and bright. She named him Hades, for his eyes held the deepness of things that wait unseen. When Kronos came for the child, she begged. "He is yours," she said, "but he is also mine. Let him breathe once before you take him." He allowed it, for mercy's disguise flatters power. She kissed the child's forehead, whispered a word she would not repeat even to herself, and handed him over. Then she turned and did not watch. The silence that followed was the sound of eternity feeding itself. One by one, her children came: Demeter, whose voice made the ground bloom; Hera, whose laughter bent even clouds to listen; Poseidon, whose fingers stirred the tides before he had even walked; and one by one, Kronos swallowed them, each time with heavier dread and hollower triumph. Within him, the weight of his own fear grew until even his dreams trembled with the echoes of crying he could not silence. Rhea's grief deepened into clarity. She went to Gaia in secret, descending through caverns lit by the slow pulse of molten veins. There, she knelt before the Earth Mother and placed her hands upon the warm stone. "Help me," she said, and the words fell like rain after drought. Gaia opened her eyes, eyes that saw backward through centuries and forward through fate. "I helped your husband once," she said softly. "The cut he made opened a door, but he has forgotten that doors do not close for free." Rhea bowed her head. "Then open one for me." Gaia smiled, not with joy but with understanding. "Another hinge, then. Another trembling." She touched Rhea's hands, and in that touch the plan took root. "Your next child," Gaia said, "must be born away from his father's gaze, hidden from time itself." "But how?" "By trickery," said Gaia. "Even gods learn from their children." When the time came, Rhea left the shining palaces of the Titans and traveled across the sea to the island of Crete. The waves rose to guard her path. The wind hushed. In a cave beneath Mount Dicte, she labored alone, the world outside unaware that its future had just taken its first breath. The child was beautiful, loud, and fearless. His cry was not like the others. It was not sorrow, but challenge. She named him Zeus. As she cradled him, Gaia's whisper stirred through the stones. "The sky will tremble again." Rhea nodded. "Let it." When Kronos came asking, she returned to his hall carrying a bundle wrapped in soft cloth. Her eyes were red with false tears, her hands trembling as truth and deceit entwined. "Another child," he said. She bowed her head and held out the bundle. "Take him. End the prophecy." He did not look inside. He could not bear the sight of innocence any longer. He swallowed the bundle whole, believing himself safe once more. But what he swallowed was not his son. It was a stone, smooth and heavy, wrapped in the shape of love. The deception held. The curse slept for a little while. The world turned quietly, though it carried within it a heartbeat too strong to stay hidden. In the cave at Dicte, Rhea nursed her secret. The nymphs of Crete cared for the child, singing lullabies loud enough to drown even the listening ears of time. He-goat Amalthea gave him milk, and from her horns poured honey and plenty. When he laughed, storms gathered playfully above the peaks. When he reached for light, sparks danced across his fingertips. The cave itself seemed to hum, as though the world beneath already knew the shape of its next god. Rhea watched from afar, visiting in dreams. She whispered to him of justice and measure, of mercy and patience. She told him not to hurry, for even prophecy ripens slowly. Meanwhile, Kronos began to feel unease. He dreamed of stones falling from his mouth, of rivers running backward, of a voice, young, bold, and familiar, calling his name from the end of time. The sickle, long hidden, rang faintly in its cave, as though memory were sharpening itself. He rose from sleep and walked the dark corridors of his realm. The walls seemed to lean toward him, listening. Who whispers my undoing? He demanded. But silence, loyal only to truth, did not answer. The Titans watched him with quiet worry. Themis frowned at her unseen scales. Oceanus stirred uneasily in his bed of tides. Rhea alone looked calm, her sorrow now disguised as serenity. Each night, she whispered to the stars, "Grow strong, my son, grow wise." And somewhere far away, in a cave lit by the heart of the world, a child's breath grew steady. He dreamed of thunder before thunder was born. He dreamed of light breaking chains. He dreamed of a sky learning once more to tremble. The prophecy was no longer waiting. It was waking. The cave beneath Mount Dicte was a cradle of secrets. It breathed in rhythm with the infant god it hid, its walls shimmering faintly as though echoing the heartbeat of the world. Each night, the wind slipped through narrow cracks in the rock, carrying whispers of prophecies yet unspoken. The air was alive with listening. Zeus grew beneath that listening. His first laughter was the sound of storm clouds gathering above distant seas. His first tears, the rainfall that soothed parched valleys. The nymphs who tended him learned to read the weather by his moods. When he slept, the stars burned steady. When he woke, they trembled. Amalthea, the goat whose milk fed him, nuzzled him with the gentleness of ancient patience. From her horns poured sweetness. From her eyes the calm of a creature that remembers the first dawn. She would rest beside him, her breath slow, her heart enormous. And when he reached for her horn one morning, grasping it with infant strength, it broke, not from harm but from destiny. From the break spilled nectar and golden fruit. Amalthea bowed her head, not in pain, but in offering. Thus was born the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, to remind the gods that abundance begins with kindness. Outside, the Kurites danced, their armor clashing in rhythmic song to hide the cries of the child. They struck their shields together so that Kronos, who ruled by silence and fear, would hear only thunder, never laughter. Their dance was fierce and joyful, a hymn to concealment, a celebration of the world's defiance. The mountains themselves joined the rhythm, and from their peaks rolled the first true echoes of thunder. As Zeus grew, so too did his questions. He would stare at the ceiling of the cave, where cracks glowed with the molten veins of Gaia's blood, and ask, "Why does the sky sleep?" The nymph Adrastea smiled. "Because once, the sky feared its own trembling. And why do I tremble? Because you will wake it." Years passed, though time in the cave moved differently, measured not by days, but by the deepening of light in Zeus's eyes. His hands grew strong. His voice began to carry tones that made the air stand still. He learned the names of stones and winds. He could call lightning by breathing the right word. He could still storms by whispering the right silence. Gaia herself spoke to him sometimes through dreams. Her voice was deep, slow, maternal, like the shifting of tectonic plates beneath the world's skin. "You are not born to destroy," she told him. "You are born to remember balance. But to remember, you must first wake what forgets." Zeus woke one morning with a weight in his chest, the first true restlessness of divinity. He stepped outside the cave for the first time, barefoot upon the dew-dark grass of Crete. The air rushed to greet him, eager, uncertain. Above, clouds gathered without command. The sea shimmered far below, and for the first time in memory, the sky blinked. He raised his hand. Lightning quivered between his fingers, raw and innocent. It did not strike, it hummed, curious, alive. The light reflected in his eyes, and for an instant, the world saw what it had been missing. The spark that could teach both day and night to speak. But power has memory, and memory calls its own witnesses. Far above, in the palace of the Titans, Kronos stirred from uneasy sleep. A sound, not of thunder yet, but of promise, rolled across the heavens. It rattled the edges of his throne. He sat upright, cold breath misting in the stillness. Who calls my name from the horizon? None answered, but the walls trembled. Rhea felt it too. Her heart leapt with both fear and joy. She looked toward the west where Crete lay hidden behind curtains of sea and storm. He lives, she whispered. The sky begins to remember itself. Kronos rose and paced the corridors. A sound, he muttered, like chains breaking. Themis, keeper of balance, approached with her quiet grace. Perhaps it is only the wind, but even she knew better. The sound had depth. It had intention. It was not the voice of weather. It was the first heartbeat of thunder. Zeus's days grew longer. The Curetes taught him the rhythm of courage, the pattern of defense. Do not strike to destroy, they said. Strike to reveal. He practiced with the spear, with the stone, with the breath that could move mountains. Each movement carried a hum of thunder not yet named. He asked Adrastea one night, "Why does lightning follow thunder?" "Because even light needs to listen first," she said. "And thunder is the world saying it heard." Zeus smiled, understanding without needing to explain. He began to speak less and listen more. The storms followed his silences, but word of his power began to drift beyond the island. The sea itself could not keep such a secret. It whispered to Oceanus, who turned in his vast sleep and murmured to the rivers. The rivers carried the tale to valleys, and the valleys to the wind. Soon, even the stars tilted their faces toward Crete, waiting for what would come next. Kronos grew restless. He ordered the Titans to patrol the skies, to listen for the shape of rebellion. But the sky itself had changed. Its winds had learned to disobey. Clouds formed where they pleased. And in the distance, a low growl of thunder answered each command with indifference. At dusk one evening, Zeus climbed to the highest peak above his cave. The world stretched vast and trembling beneath him. He felt the pulse of the earth through his soles, the pull of the stars above his brow. He raised both hands and closed his eyes. The air thickened. Clouds gathered, circling like thoughts that had waited too long to be spoken. Lightning rose from the ground instead of falling from the sky. It crowned him, soft and fierce, like anointing fire. In that instant, Zeus remembered every story his mother had whispered. Of chains, of swallowing, of fear disguised as love. And something within him answered, not with rage but with clarity. He opened his mouth and spoke a single word. It was not a name, not a curse, just the sound of awakening. Thunder rolled. It rolled across seas and over mountains, through palaces and under tombs. It shook the old order, cracked the stillness of the golden age that had already curdled into dread. It reached the depths of Tartarus, where the hundred-handed stirred and the Cyclopes blinked, recognizing the vibration as kin to freedom. The world shivered. The sky trembled. Zeus lowered his hands, and the storm calmed instantly. Around him, the air smelled of rain and new beginnings. He looked up and smiled for the first time, not as a child, but as one who has met his purpose. In the high palace of Kronos, fear returned in full bloom. "The sound again," he roared. "The world remembers rebellion." Rhea did not answer. She stood at her window, tears silent upon her cheeks. "No," she whispered, "the world remembers hope." And far away, beneath the silver light of a restless sky, Zeus sat upon the edge of the mountain, watching lightning dance across the sea. He did not yet know what destiny awaited him, nor how the war would come. But he knew this, that the sky was no longer sleeping. Thunder had found its voice, and in the echo of that first roar, the world began to turn toward its next trembling. The air grew restless over Crete. Clouds gathered not as weather, but as witnesses. Each night, Zeus climbed the mountain where his first thunder had been born, and there he listened not for voices, but for vibrations. The world was whispering again, and he understood its language. The time for silence was thinning. The nymphs sensed it too. Adrastea no longer sang softly. Her lullabies had turned into chants of protection. The Curetes sharpened their spears, though they did not know against whom they would be raised. Even the sea seemed to draw breath, preparing to remember something it had long tried to forget. Zeus's hands had grown calloused from the shaping of storms. Lightning came to him easily now, like a thought that arrived already complete. Yet power, he had learned, is not the same as readiness. Some forces ripen slowly, and he feared awakening the sky too soon. Still, dreams came, dreams of chains clattering open, of stone doors trembling beneath the weight of prophecy. In one such dream Gaia appeared. Her form was vast and familiar, her voice the low hum that holds all patience. "My grandson," she said, "the curse that swallowed the sky still festers in the belly of time. The Titans rule without heart. The world needs its breath again." Zeus bowed his head. "I hear the world call grandmother, but my father is time itself. How can I strike at what turns every blade dull?" Gaia smiled, slow and sorrowful. "Even time must pause to listen. I will show you how." She placed her hand upon the earth, and from the deep came a tremor, not of fear, but of awakening. "Beneath Tartarus," she whispered, "the old ones wait, the hundred-handed, bound by pride, the Cyclopes, blinded by silence. Free them, and they will forge what you cannot imagine." Zeus awoke with the scent of iron in his lungs and purpose in his pulse. He knew then that the war had already begun, not in battlefields, but in breaths. Far away, Kronos grew uneasy. The thunder's memory still clung to him, echoing in his bones. He stood on the balcony of his fortress and watched the heavens for cracks. "The air stirs too loudly," he muttered. "The sky speaks words I did not permit." Themis approached, her eyes veiled in thought. "Perhaps the world remembers its promise." Kronos turned sharply. "Promises breed rebellion. I will hear no more of them." Yet his own dreams betrayed him. He saw himself standing in a storm, the wind shouting in a voice he recognized but could not command. He awoke in sweat and silence, his hands trembling. "He lives," he whispered. "The hidden one lives." Zeus descended into the underworld's edge, guided by Gaia's dream. The passage smelled of copper and old rain. Rivers of shadow flowed beside him, murmuring in the dialect of forgotten ages. The deeper he went, the heavier the air grew, until sound itself began to bend. At last he reached the gates of Tartarus. They were vast as continents, forged from black metal veined with lightning that had long since died. Around them curled chains thick as mountains, each link carved with the mark of Uranus, the first fear. Zeus lifted his hand. The chains shivered but did not yield. "I am not here to bind," he said softly. "I am here to listen." The words sank like seeds into the iron. A faint glow stirred beneath the surface, old power remembering its own heartbeat. "Who speaks?" came a voice like boulders grinding in their sleep. "I am the son of Rhea, the grandson of Gaia," Zeus said. "I come to unbind what should not have been caged." From the depths, three shadows moved, vast, strange, and sorrowful. The 100-handed rose, each gesture stirring storms of dust. "We remember the cut," they said. "We remember the promise." The sky trembled once. Shall it tremble again? Zeus stepped forward. "Yes, but this time it will tremble for freedom." They regarded him, and the silence that followed was enormous. Then slowly they smiled. "Then we are yours." Behind them, another light awakened, white, pure, and burning. The Cyclopes opened their single eyes, and in them glowed the reflection of storms yet to come. "We forged the sickle once," said Brontes, voice deep as thunder's root. "We can forge again." Zeus bowed his head. "Forge not to cut, but to awaken." They nodded. "Then you shall have the fire that listens." They struck their anvils, stone upon stone, light upon darkness. Sparks leapt, each one singing the name of a weapon yet unborn. The sound rose and filled the hollows of the world until even Kronos stirred in his sleep, muttering of hammers and storms. When the forging ended, the Cyclopes came forth bearing gifts. A bolt of lightning alive and eager, a thunderhead bound to Zeus's breath, and a storm that would obey only mercy. "These are not for conquest," said Steropes. "They are for balance reclaimed." Zeus took the gifts, and the moment he did, the world changed key. The mountains groaned in recognition. The seas shuddered in joy. Even the stars turned slightly in their courses, making room for what had been reborn. He raised the bolt once, and it sang. a sound pure and long, like rain finding its name for the first time. The 100-handed knelt, their arms like forests swaying in prayer. Above, Kronos felt the tremor ripple through time. His cup spilled, his throne cracked. The earth shakes, he growled. The old wounds bleed again. Rhea, standing in shadow, whispered to herself, "The wound heals by its own echo." Kronos turned to the Titans. "Prepare the heavens. The child comes. The sky will not tremble in defiance. It will burn." Oceanus rose, weary but loyal. "And if the sea itself turns against us, then drown it," said Kronos, though his voice faltered as thunder answered far away. Zeus stood at the mouth of Tartarus. The freed ones knelt behind him, their chains now melted into rivers of fire. "Are you ready?" asked Brontes. Zeus looked upward. Above him, the stars wheeled like watchful eyes. "The sky has waited long enough." He cast the first lightning into the air. It split the dark like truth cutting through denial. The bolt struck the horizon, and the sound that followed was not war. It was awakening. The Titans heard it and trembled. The world opened its lungs and took a breath it had been saving for ages. The seas heaved. Mountains leaned forward. Winds tore their own paths across the plains. In that single moment, creation remembered its wild heart. Zeus lowered his arm. The bolt still hummed in his hand, eager for the next strike. He whispered to it, "Not yet. Let them remember the sound first." And above, the sky, his sky, answered with a low growl that spread from horizon to horizon, the first true warning of the war to come. The storm had risen, and this time the heavens were not afraid to tremble. The storm no longer waited at the edges of the world. It lived within it. Every mountain pulse, every wave crash, every gust of wind spoke the same name now, Zeus. He stood upon the summit of Othries, where clouds clung like armor to the peaks. Around him gathered his allies, the freed Cyclopes, their single eyes bright with purpose, and the 100-handed, whose many arms moved like entire tempests learning their rhythm. Beneath them lay the deep trembling of the world, for Tartarus was awake again, and all that had been chained was learning to move. "The time of stillness ends," Zeus said. His voice was not loud, but it carried through stone and sky alike. "The sky will tremble as it once did, and from that trembling, truth will rise." He lifted his hand. Lightning flared, coiling like a living serpent. The bolt hummed, eager for justice, not vengeance. The Cyclopes had forged it with care, not to kill, but to awaken. Its light painted the clouds in silver fire. Below, Kronos looked up from his throne of black stone. His crown flickered between gold and shadow. Around him stood the Titans, Oceanus, Iapetus, Hyperion, and Themis, uncertain whether to fight for loyalty or for balance. Rhea stood apart, her eyes full of centuries. She had seen rebellion before. She knew what came next. Kronos rose, his robe sweeping like the last tide of an age. "So the sun remembers," he said. "The mouth that devoured the world must now swallow thunder?" He laughed, but the sound was brittle. I am time. I cannot be ended. Zeus answered softly, time does not end. It learns. The first lightning struck. It did not aim for Kronos. It struck the mountain, splitting it in two. The sound that followed was not of destruction, but of release. The air changed color. The world exhaled. Then the war began. The heavens became the battlefield of ages. The Titans, vast and golden, hurled mountains like stones. Hyperion's light seared the clouds, and Oceanus's waves climbed the sky like blue serpents. But Zeus answered with storms that learned as they struck. Each thunderclap carried wisdom. Each flash of lightning wrote new law upon the air. The 100-handed tore cliffs from the earth and flung them high, their laughter echoing like drums of liberation. The Cyclopes forged weapons of brightness that blinded only pride. Below, rivers changed course, forests burned and were reborn in the same breath. Even the stars drew closer to watch. Kronos raised his sickle once more, the same blade that had cut the first sky, and swung. The arc of its light tore a canyon through the clouds. You will not unmake me, he roared. Zeus met the strike. Lightning and sickle collided, and for a moment the universe itself forgot to breathe. The impact split time into echoes. Past, present, and future shivered as one. Mountains sank. The sea rose. The world's heart paused, and then, slowly, began again. Kronos staggered. The sickle fell from his hand, ringing like memory hitting stone. Zeus stepped forward through the rain, calm as the dawn. You feared your children, he said. You swallowed what you loved, but even fear must rest. Kronos's eyes dimmed. You will fear them too, he whispered. Even gods repeat their fathers. Then let me be the first to break that circle, Zeus said. He raised his hand. The final bolt descended, not as fire, but as light that clarified. It wrapped Kronos in brilliance, lifting him from the throne and carrying him downward, through cloud and mountain, through the deep places of the earth, until he vanished into the stillness of Tartarus. There the 100-handed built him a throne, not of glory but of memory, so that even defeat could not forget where it came from. When the thunder quieted, the world was new. The clouds parted, and light poured through, unburdened. Rivers found new beds. The air tasted clean, as if it had been holding its breath for centuries. The Titans who survived laid down their weapons. Oceanus returned to his depths. Themis, keeper of balance, bowed her head in silent relief. Rhea climbed the mountain where her son stood and placed her hand upon his shoulder. The sky trembles, she said, but now it trembles for life. Zeus looked upon the world, stilling the last flickers of lightning in his palm. It will tremble again, he said, for that is how it remembers, but never again for fear. He turned to his allies, the Cyclopes and the 100-handed. You are free. Let no one chain you again, not even me. They bowed deeply, their vast forms dissolving into the elements they had shaped. One became wind, another rain, another the steady hum of the world's turning. In the heavens above, the stars resumed their eternal walk, though now they glowed brighter, as if washed clean by thunder. The earth below softened, drinking the storm as nourishment, and the sky, vast and trembling, no longer felt like a prison. It felt like breath. Zeus built his throne high upon Mount Olympus, not from gold but from cloud and intention. Around him gathered the new gods, his freed siblings, their eyes wide with wonder at a sky that finally belonged to no one alone. Poseidon held the seas, Hades guarded the deep, Hera tended the pulse of loyalty, Demeter made the fields remember spring, and Hestia kept the fire that teaches peace. Kronos' curse had ended, not by silence, but by understanding. The old sky had fallen, but its echo had become wisdom. From it rose a new order, not of chains but of balance. Zeus ruled not as time's conqueror, but as its steward, teaching even eternity how to breathe. He stood at the edge of Olympus one evening, the sun sinking like a memory below the horizon. Lightning coiled softly at his side, resting like a loyal thought. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the distant laughter of mortals who did not yet know his name. He smiled. The sky trembled again, quietly, reverently, as if bowing to its own rebirth. And in that trembling, the world learned what it meant to be awake. Thank you for listening to Sleep with Myth.